From Christianity Today, you're listening to The Bulletin, a podcast about the people, events, and issues that are shaping our world. I'm Clarissa Moll, producer and moderator of The Bulletin. Today, I'm at Soundcheck at the Aura, a rock club in downtown Portland, Maine. I'm here with my two teenage sons and their cousin to see Switchfoot, a band that I've followed since I was in college and my boys have come to love. They have a teenage garage band of their own now, and let's be honest, the stage antics and musical prowess of Switchfoot has appeal that transcends generations. I'm here for something else, though. Back in the spring, Switchfoot's lead singer, Jon Foreman, released his second studio album, In Bloom, and the soundtrack has been running through my head ever since. Jon has always seemed in his lyrics to be a man who both understands life's darkness and persistently pursues the light. I caught up with him before the evening's show to talk about suffering, hope, and the wisdom that can come with middle age. Listen in now to my conversation with Jon Foreman. Jon, welcome to the Bulletin.
Hey, thank you for having me. And thank you for your patience.
Hey, no problem.
Letting me and the boys get some surfing this morning.
Well, you know, it's like, what are we, less than 10 miles from the ocean as the crow flies? And I'm thinking about all the days you spend on the road every year in landlocked places.
Yes.
I've got to figure there's got to be this craving once you get this close to the ocean. Like, I got to tip my toes in.
Yeah, we're junkies. Whenever we get a chance to actually go surfing on tour, it is a gift.
Now, how many days are you spending on tour a year right now?
It's actually more dates than I would prefer, to be honest. When you're a kid, you're thinking, oh, yeah, let's go out. Let's, 100, 200 days on the road. Sure, why not? Yeah. 250. I don't need to be home for anything. But nowadays with my kids, every day home is that's a price. That's a cost, missing my family. So yeah, this run, we just finished beautiful letdown across Canada. We're going to do, I think 15 or 20 beautiful letdown shows in the States. And then we take it to Europe. Yeah. And then we're done for the year. So, and there's no complaints. I love what I do, but I do miss my family. I always say I would play the music for free. Mm-hmm. The thing that I get paid for is to leave my wife and kids and go somewhere else.
So you got to make it worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And your kids can't leave with you anymore in the same way they could have when they were little, right?
Exactly.
Because there's Little League and there's play practice and there's all of that kind of stuff that roots them at home.
Yeah, I had this, I was playing the rock boat with our friends Young the Giant and a bunch of other people, New Respects. And I thought it would be the perfect time. I'll bring the family out for this cruise. It'll be a great vacation. And my daughter's like, Dad, I can't go. I got School of Rock. We're doing Green Day versus Blink. And I'm like, okay, all right, well. So it was just me and my son out at sea. So, you make the most. But yeah, it is that where schedules get much more hectic, as as kids get older.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate taking my kids when I can everywhere that I go for work because they get to see you doing the thing.
Yeah.
I think it kind of demythologizes it a little bit for them.
As much integration as possible.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. My daughter's been joining me on stage.
Yes.
A few times whenever she's out. And that has been, just a beautiful, beautiful experience for me.
Really? Now, I want to ask, though, because you're pretty private about your family.
Yeah.
I'm pretty private about mine. I mean, there are reasons why we do that.
So many reasons.
But you can't be private anymore when you've got your daughter up in front of 500 people or 750 people, particularly not when it's just a sort of like come out and wave to the crowd with Dad. It's like singing, it's sharing her own story, and she's been pretty transparent. Yeah,
it's been wild. So it started with her cousin, my nephew Jet, he performed at the Bro-Am, which is our big event, and she said, "Oh, Dad, can I play too?" And she just has this fearless spirit that goes so far beyond what I've ever come in contact with. It's just unbelievable. And so she, like, for example, she found out he was playing this Christmas event, and she says, "I want to do it." I'm like, "Okay, sure. Well, let's sing a song together." And she said, No, I want to write a song and then perform the song. I'm like, "My sweet girl, it's tonight." And she's like, "I know." And she sang a song she wrote, a few hours earlier that evening. And I love that. And you never want to be the person that is putting a wet blanket on that.
Yeah.
So when she said, "Yeah, I want to play the Bro-Am. I want to sing with you." This is like 7,000, 8,000 people in our hometown. And my first thought was, this is a pretty public thing. And we've always been a very private family. My wife doesn't have a Facebook, Instagram account. What's the point?
Yeah.
It's to keep up with the people we love. And most of those people we can call on the phone.
They know your life.
Yeah. Right. So, so that was a big step. And right before we go to play the song, I said, "Daisy, do you want to introduce the song?" And I thought she would just say, "Ladies and gentlemen, this next song is this." And she says, "Sure. Yeah, I'll introduce the song." She says, "Hey, everybody, my name's Daisy Foreman, and I have cerebral palsy. And what that means is that part of my body doesn't work like the other part. So my left side is affected, and I'd like to dedicate this song to everyone out there that has a difference." And part of the event goes to help challenged athletes. We teach them how to surf earlier in the day, and they get up on stage, and we just kind of champion who they are. There's kids with limb differences and disabilities, and so she definitely resonates with that. But then she goes further and she says, "But I'd also like to dedicate this to the people that have differences on the inside. And that's all of us, because we all are made different. And this is a song for you." And it was just this thing where I'm up there with dark glasses, just
and you're like,
trying to fight back the tears. Even now it's so emotional just thinking, because there's this strength that is found when in confession, in honesty, and it's just this beautiful thing to hear someone tell their story. And suddenly she's unassailable. There's nothing you can say, because she's already said it. And it's such a place of strength, and I love that.
And there's something that's so raw about watching our children endure the brokenness of the world, I think. That impulse to protect them, and yet to see your child stand up and speak out of that brokenness that has become strength is just, it hits you in the gut.
Yeah, it's wild. And it was such a beautiful moment. And I've read that grit is a big part of, a successful kid. And I feel like in those moments, that's what you want to see, in your kid. Because who knows how long I'm going to be around, or even how many moments in her life that I'm going to actually be there to be like, "Okay, here, let me pick you up off the sidewalk and we can walk forward." But to see that in her without me, that's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And that grit that you talk about, it's something that we can't teach in a didactic kind of way. It's all the little rub some dirt in it and get back in the game moments. But there is a place, and I think about this in your lyrics when you talk about the sidewalk ending. Like, there's this place where you come with a child who has this sort of wisdom that's beyond their years that they've acquired through suffering or through, just having to acknowledge their brokenness in a way that where you stand side by side with them, not as a teacher, but as a companion in this.
Yeah.
Like, we are both standing where what is known ends.
Yeah.
And again, like, that's one thing to do with a peer, with a friend, to be like, I'll stand with you when you don't know what's coming next. But
Right.
it's a whole different thing to stand with your child in that.
And I do think in a culture that's so um, forward-minded towards the young, the new, the next, which I think there's a beauty that comes from that too, newness, freshness. But I think it's a bit imbalanced when you look at cultures past, where there's a reverence and an awareness of what our elders went through. You know, it pains me to think of, veterans alone.
Yeah.
Where they're, kids, grandkids are on TikTok and, whatever. You're like, oh man, my heart breaks for those people that gave so much. Yeah. So there's got to be a balance to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's just me getting old.
No.
Finally seeing it like that, But I do, like, I have so many great memories with my grandparents while they were still with us, and the stories that they have. And you think about what has happened in the past 100 years.
Yeah.
Even in my occupation as music 100 years ago did not mean something you could start or stop.
Yeah.
Like if you had the number one song in the nation, it meant that people bought sheet music of your song.
Yeah.
Oh
my goodness.
And radio destroyed the music industry, in quotes, as it was at the time, because suddenly, so all these things where you think, okay, so I'm obsessed with playing music acoustic without electricity, and often impromptu after the show, because I feel like that is a way to connect with what has been deemed music for thousands and thousands of years before this one advent of electrical music that we
Does it feel
experience.
less performative to you?
It's a different performance. I feel like it's just a different sport altogether.
Yeah.
It's
out in the street.
It's out in the street. There's cars. You're just a street performer.
Yeah.
You're busking without any physical impact. There's no hat. And I love the idea that, like, with that kind of, there's just a risk to it, and it has nothing to do with money. There's a book, Lewis Hyde. It's called. He wrote a book called The Gift, and I feel like it impacted me that's a way that I can keep the gift in motion. If music is a gift, which I believe it's a God-given thing, I don't know where it comes from, and it just happens. If I can give it away, then that's a way to keep the gift in motion. I think that when you charge for something that's a gift, it's a way to feed your family, but it's also, it gets a little convoluted. How do you keep the gift going?
Yeah. Well, I think just that reflection on what was, it makes me think of your relationship with Charlie Peacock, who of course is super precious to us here at the Bulletin.
Yes.
We produce his Music and Meaning podcast, and in his book New Way to Be Human, you describe him as like a second father.
Yeah.
And I think too of what we saw in the documentary of The Making of Interrobang, where it's like Tony Berg is he has this teacher's heart with you.
Yeah.
Is there something about growing older that makes us more open to that? Like, to have that, what you're describing, like this reverence for other voices that maybe we wouldn't have regarded 20 years ago.
Yeah, I do think holding two things in tension is something that our culture is not good at. I think this other book I've been reading, Master and His Emissary, and The Matter with Everything, these Ian McGilchrist books that are just so dense and yet so rich. But he talks about how post-enlightenment, kind of the left side of our brain, which loves abstraction and loves black and white thinking, yes or no, sees metaphor as a lie and myth, it's not true, and I think our culture, that's kind of one of the reasons I love music, is because it kind of gets a pass. It gets past all that into your soul, and it can change the architecture of your life from the inside out. One song can do that, right?
Oh yeah.
And there's so many examples of songs that have done that for me, and I think songs are great at holding things in tension. Two ideas at the same time, and yet the left brain says, "Oh, one of them has to be a lie."
Yeah.
But we all know, I mean, life is filled with paradox and contradiction, and every emotion is somewhat of a mixed emotion, right?
Yeah.
So and I think maybe I'm wanting to embrace that more than ever. I mean, I'm thinking of Charlie. When I first met him, I thought to myself, "Oh, this guy's kind of an old dude," And now I'm older than he was when I met him, and I'm like, "No, I'm still young, right?" So maybe there's another contradiction and paradox right there.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also being open to teachers who don't always tell you what you want to hear, too. I mean, I think that's part of that growing up, maturing is like, when you're in your 20s, you're more apt to like a yes man in your life. You're less likely to regard someone who wants to tell you hard truths. That whether it is, I don't like this music that you're playing, or I think you're making bad life choices, like whatever it is, I'm not interested in that when I'm 23, 24, 25.
Yeah, but are you ever? That's the question. And the other thing, the corollary would be, how many older people do you know that are just calcified in this is the way it is?
That is so true.
And you're like, okay, well, that's just the way the tree is always going to be.
Yeah.
It is a strange thing. I love Kierkegaard and that existential crisis and all the thoughts of choice and the onus of your own imperative desires, that how they weave their way through your life. And yet you think through all the things that your peers and what you grew up around dictate, and you think, it's an interesting thing. Salvation. I mean, what a concept, right? How does that ever happen other than some sort of divine spark that sets us on a different path?
And it would seem that community is vital for understanding that.
And I think on that note, we, with the empirical mindset, spend so much time on the truth, the veracity of what we're saying. And I have never been convinced by truth alone.
Ooh, okay, tell me more.
I think that love and like you said, community. Like when someone loves me, I'm listening. I'm open. When you tell me the truth, I don't know, fake news. You know what I mean? It's when if you take the moment to like, oh, I spilled this thing or something bigger. I just lost a friend or whatever. When you meet me there, I am listening. And I feel like music does that somewhat, but it cannot love the way that a human in the right moment can do. And I think, that's a wild thing about Christ is I think he, with his life here on the planet, was not a program. It was not, there's certainly things we can apply, rules of conduct, ways that we can treat each other. But I think those moments, salvific moments where our lives are actually changed, it's an act of love.
Yeah, it's truth embedded in a person. And when truth takes on skin, it's a whole lot different for us.
And that's the other interesting thing about the human condition in this kind of post-enlightenment empirical data phase, where all the things that are worth living for. People, love, justice, honor. They can't really be represented with statistics or an equation, and they need to be embodied and learned. And that I think that's part of the quandary.
Well, the pandemic revealed that to us, didn't it? Like this desire for certainty.
Yeah.
Something that was knowable.
Oh my gosh.
Quantities.
How many endless wasted hours looking for what does it mean online? Or doom scrolling okay. So, but wait. There's
can I wear a cloth mask, or is the N95?
Oh my gosh, right? Yeah,
right?
You're looking for these keys, and truth exists.
Yes.
But you're like, I don't know what it is.
Where is it?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if just even this album of In Bloom, it kind of had to come after the pandemic in some ways. Was there a sort of living through? I mean, you made Interrobang during the pandemic?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, does there have...
Very much.
Right?
Yeah.
And is there, to some extent, is your writing now a product of those lived years that were so intense as we think about them in terms of truth and certainty and knowledge and lived experience?
I do feel like I am, if the younger me is looking for victories and wins. I think, and there's nothing wrong with any of these versions of understanding the world, but I think the way I conceptualize my reality, especially for In Bloom, it was a garden, and that I think that has been more healthy for me. I don't know, just the idea that some things die, and we all will die. And is that a loss or a win? Finite and Infinite Games, Kars is this author that wrote about the finite game is the one that can be played. It has rules, has a timeline. You win or you lose. The infinite game is the one that outlasts you. Long after you're dead, you have made a contribution to the infinite game. It could be art, could be love, could be community. And those are things that, again, maybe I'm the old man, but I love the idea that something that has caused deep pain and loss can actually bring beauty. Yeah, so that whole concept of the crap that you see in the garden can actually fertilize future blooms. That feels hopeful, and that's what the record came from.
Well, for someone who talks so much about hope, you also talk a lot about death.
Yeah.
I mean,
a ton. Yeah, if it's not about hope, it's about death, and it's also about hope, but it's mostly about death.
But I mean, that's the shadow proves the sunshine, right? You can't, what is hope unless there is a reality that is so heartbreaking that we, could not know ourselves without that hope.
Yeah, and maybe again that didactic thinking of win and loss is unhelpful when it comes to the human condition. That the soil is much richer than that, and loss, and even the idea of mixed feelings, that it can be, a bitter sweet aging process, as you move through this. I don't want to go back to the kid that wrote The Beautiful Letdown. As we've been touring it, I think back and go, would you trade places? I mean, there's so many things that I loved about that season. Yeah. I would I do it again? Yeah, absolutely. But only if I could get to here. Yes. And here I would much rather, what a gift to be right now.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the things I've learned would come any other way. They're hard fought.
Yeah.
And there's a why wouldn't there be a cost to be here? And I do think that if it's in the context of the arc of the infinite story, then there's something beautiful about that, you know?
I found it interesting just hearing the people sing along with you when you sing eulogy in concert. Like
Mm,
there's this there's this longing for, I mean, eulogy is like a good word, right? And we
yeah,
often hear it said, tell the people that you love the things that you love about them before they're gone. Like don't wait for the eulogy
yeah,
to
yeah,
say the things that need
yeah.
to be said.
Mm,
And listening to those people singing, like there's this deep longing to find meaning in the midst of our shatteredness.
mm,
Um, and you have this phrase in there that I wanted to talk to you about because I've written about something similar. You talk about being the mosaic of a shattered man.
mm.
And I remember after my husband died, someone they sent me a link about this kintsugi. It's this Japanese
Yeah.
art form. A vase is broken, and you take the broken piece and you place it back in the spot where it had fallen out, and you mend the seams with gold.
Mm,
And they were like, I think this is a really beautiful image of what your life is like. Like it's
mm.
broken, but God can make this into something beautiful.
Yeah.
And it was a very kind thought. But
Mm.
I was like,
Yeah.
not even close.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I am shattered.
No, thank you.
There is nothing,
Yeah.
right? And I wrote about how I saw the mosaic as like a much better image for what happens to us
Mm.
in the midst
Yeah.
of suffering. Like that that somehow through the crushing and the disintegration, you are made into something that is unrecognizable from what was before.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I loved that. Like, oh yeah, I think this is what people are longing for when they hear you sing that. Like, yeah, we are walking around shattered, and there are forces in our life that are saying, oh, just stick that piece back in, mend it with gold. But
Yeah.
we need a different image.
Yeah. It's almost as if the pain is a chrysalis
Yes.
or a crucible,
Yes.
like I don't think on the outside you look pretty much the same.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I do think in the inside, I remember my son, he was like, but what's happening inside the chrysalis?
Yes.
Is it a caterpillar or is it a butterfly? I'm like, that's the wild thing. We went on a butterfly kick, with kids. You go on all these different things and you learn so much about, and it's this thing that a lot of people don't really know what happens, right?
Yeah.
Like it's this, there's, you can estimate and have a hypothesis, but it's almost as if it creates this the caterpillar creates this chrysalis that consumes all the materials and then produces this other thing. And it's unrecognizable, and maybe that's what it is rather than because it is maybe there's certain smaller hardships that Kitsugi could be a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a golden part of I'm the same person, I'm the same vase. And then there's other pain that you go through that feels like, no, I can't even recognize that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe that's not so bad.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a friend who is a surfer in South Africa. Big waves, big sharks. And he feels like he's an incredible photographer, also a big wave surfer, and just a wild man. And we were leaving South Africa the next day, and there's a big swell hitting. And he's like, oh, this is great. I've got boards. I'll hook you guys up. And the swell was huge. Like for me, if I have a big wave gun, 7 foot, maybe 8 foot is what I'm comfortable with as far as the size of the board. And he's like, oh no, you'll need 10-foot guns. It's going to be massive. Yeah.
Okay.
And we're like, oh, okay. And he's taking all of our excuses away. And he's like, he told us afterwards, he's like, I'm convinced that, modern man is not confronted with his mortality often enough. And I feel like one of my jobs on the planet is take people right to the edge.
Oh, wow.
He told us that afterwards.
That's good.
And he and all his friends were also wearing the life inflatable things, unbeknownst to us. And I broke my board out of this place called the Crayfish Factory, and it was just one of those things where I'm like, it's freezing water, big sharks, and now I'm out with a half a board, and the fiberglass is hitting me in the face, and I'm trying to swim against the current to get back to shore. But it was definitely a moment where I'm like, oh, yeah, so this is a time to stay calm.
Yeah.
And whenever you have those moments, you look at people differently,
Mm-hmm.
you look at yourself differently, hopefully kinder,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit more patient, giving, gracious.
There was this medieval tradition of Ars Moriendi where where woodcutters would create these different images that would guide people who, of course, are like experiencing the Black Plague and have very high mortality rates in Europe. And they would guide them through the steps to sort of make themselves ready to die.
Wow.
And the idea was that these would be an aid for priests who would go to give the last rites to people who were dying of the Black Plague, or better yet, they would be like instructive tools. Like you and I would use them now to sort of like contemplate our mortality, to think about our end, to reconcile with each other and with God.
Yeah.
And it makes me think a little bit about, I jokingly ask, boy, you talk a lot about death, but maybe that you have been engaging in that process all along of like the more we think about our ends, the more we prioritize, right?
Yeah, and the other funny thing is like, think about it or not, it's still going to happen. It's not like if I think about it more, it's going to happen.
Yes, or if I think about it less, I can avoid it.
Yeah, and I do think it is... it's always fascinated me, ever since I was a kid, just so this happens to everyone. And, I hear my son, and the questions about it, and I think a lot of times I'm like, I don't know the answers to any of these. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
I think the adult thing often is like, give an answer isn't really sufficient, and let's move on.
Yeah.
This is uncomfortable. I'd rather not be talking about it.
Yeah. As I think about sort of the arc of our conversation, thinking about family and community and how these things inform the way we journey through life, and how the challenges of our lives and the people that we surround ourselves with, they can bring a sense of peace too, as we reckon with the reality of our end, of what is most important. And I think of Daisy standing up there. I saw a recording of her singing, was it I Propose a Toast with You?
She's done that one, yeah.
And I thought, like, this is the theme song of middle age, right? It's, if you were to write this song as a 27-year-old man, you'd be proposing a toast to other things.
To wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about the wins. Yeah. But that's a great example of a, because I think a good toast is comfortable with the polarity. I think a good...
Tell me more.
Okay,
yeah.
So like, I think if you're ever in a pinch and somebody says, here, propose a toast, think of the two polarities. Like, pin one nail up here, and hang your painting in between it. So like, here's to dark skies and bright eyes. And I think songwriting is the same thing.
Yeah.
A guitar, you pull something tight, and then you play. The string's only worth anything if it's stretched tight. And I feel like that song is, man, maybe you're right. Maybe it can only be written once you're comfortable with the polarity.
With the stretching.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. And the irony is, only time that string is not taut is the moment you stop breathing.
Yeah.
Every other moment of our life is vacillating in the liminal space between the breath in and the breath out, the heartbeat. All of it is in motion, and as are we. But I think, the illusion is I'm fixed. I'm me.
Yeah.
And I will never change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the irony too. The scary thing is, I think that's what politics has become, is like the people that are that change the least are the people we vote for, because we think that, I mean, there is a strength to that where you're like, but when I think about saying to my wife, I will never change, or, you know, like,
and she
I'm
says,
like,
I sure hope that's not the case.
wow, that's, I don't know that I would have married you. You know, like, well, there's nothing, really nothing. Okay. I will never learn. I will never grow. I will. I mean, wow, these are dark statements. You know?
Yeah. Never and always, 2 banned words in our house.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's there's a lot of beauty to be found in the vulnerability of being willing to change.
Yeah. I mean, to say, wow, I learned. I was wrong.
Yeah.
Now I see it different. I'm sorry. Wow, what a combination of confession, you know, and without that, and that's another interesting thing. I think that Christian tradition offers a path to this that, you know, secular modernism, it's hard to find its way towards. I get it, cancel culture, and people do things wrong, and we need to hold people accountable. But then what do you do? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, when you embrace a world that involves mystery, you make space for that.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
You make space for change and for what is unknowable. And it's not a scary thing necessarily.
Right. Yeah. And you can embrace somebody else in that mystery of, I don't know, they could change. They might. Yeah.
Oh, well, I could talk to you forever, but
likewise, this
has been a great conversation. Yes. And I have one question as we close. So, you know, we are musicians in our household, and it has been said, I've asked folks around, that D minor is the saddest key. Okay. D minor chord is the saddest chord. What would you say is the most hopeful chord?
Oh, well, I've gotten in, discussions.
Okay.
Heated discussions with several people. I wonder if most of those are baggage from before tempered tuning. Because back in the days, the clavier or the piano even would be tuned for a specific key.
That's true.
So the intervals were not equidistant. And so I wonder if those kind of comments are hangers on from that. There's a nameless component of these heated discussions that thinks opposite. But if I had to say the most hopeful, I love nines, and I think nines are always reaching. I think nines and twos, it's this thing where it exists beyond the chord. It transcends the chord itself. All the upper extensions feel that way for me, but the 9 especially.
All right. Well, listeners, listen for the 9s. Jon, thanks for joining me. We'll see you next week, guys. The Bulletin is a production of Christianity Today. It's produced by Clarissa Moll. The associate producer is Leslie Thompson. This episode was mixed by TJ Hester. Theme music by Dan Phelps. Eric Petrick and Mike Cosper are the executive producers of CT Media Podcasts, and Matt Stevens is our senior producer. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review to help more people find the show. Thanks for listening.